Hello and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Angus Scott. As it is an international week, we thought we'd take a little sit back and have a look and get an overview of the Big Six and where they're needed to go to really compete next season. It is a three-horse race, as we discussed last week on the Debrief. But what would it take to be actually a six-horse race next year, perhaps? What might happen during the summer to increase the tension at the top of that Premier League? That's the focus of our chat this week. And as ever, Ben Jacobs is with me. Hi, Ben.
How you doing?
Yeah, very good. This really falls into your sort of speciality, really. And we'll be, of course, hearing from Fabrizio Romano a little bit later and with his ideas and thoughts on what he's heard about where the Big Six are heading during the all-important transfer window. Should we start with a couple of sides first, Ben? Let's kick off with Chelsea and Arsenal, shall we? Let's do a bit of London first. Chelsea, for them, it may be quite a busy summer. And as you've said all along, Chelsea will take stock at the end of this season, firstly with what they think of their manager and whether Maurizio Pochettino is the man to take the club forward, and then also where they are with their players. And the first one might come before what happens with the second one.
Yeah, I think Maurizio Pochettino will be reviewed. That's pre-planned, by the way, so it's no indication that anything has changed. But naturally, if the manager changes, then plans to some extent can as well. But the transfer policy will continue to be led by the co-sporting directors, Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley. And then my expectation is that Chelsea, more than most, have two deadlines. One, 30th of June, the financial year one, and then, of course, everything leading up to deadline day. And even though Chelsea don't know yet if they've got European football, it's difficult for them because they're coming off the back of this financial year, and that will reflect on the books, the lack of European football. Whereas if we flash forwards, it may look a bit healthier because they know that in 2 financial years' time, they're going to be able to put on the Club World Cup revenue, which is expanded in North America. So Chelsea argue, talking to sources, that they're comfortably within profit and sustainability. And to some extent, that's backed up by the fact they've not been charged to date. But add another year and discount a COVID year in the monitoring period when the rules are a bit more relaxed. And we have to wait and see how this year reflects. And I think it can be simultaneously true that you're comfortably in profit and sustainability allowable loss of 105 million, but you also can't just go ahead and spend 350 million, which we say nonchalantly now, but 5-6 years ago, that could have been your budget over 3 or 4 windows and it could have got you an entire squad. Now it just buys you a couple of Declan Rices and so on. So Chelsea may have need to spend, but also have to be careful about reaching a number quite that high. And that's why I expect outgoings to be really important. And I think that if they can bring in £100 million plus of sales, then it will allow them to move in the market. And we know they want an elite striker. They may need a midfielder if Conor Gallagher leaves. They'll be looking at centre-backs, and a left-back's going to be a priority as well. So those are the 4 key positions for Chelsea. And when I say 100 plus million, you might think, well, how did they get that? Quite easily, actually, because Lewis Hall is going to join Newcastle with an obligation to buy if they finish 15th or better. They've budgeted for that. That's 28 million initially, plus some add-ons. Ian Matson's playing well. Dortmund want to sign him. Chelsea want 30 to 35 million. Romelu Lukaku is valued at a similar amount. Amanda Broja is for sale. It's not quite worked out in his loan spell at Fulham, but nonetheless, they would love to try and get a fee for him as well. You've got Gallagher, you've got Trevor Chalobah, you've got Mark Cucurella, you've got Thiago Silva, who's expected to come off the wage bill. So there's a lot of ways that Chelsea can get to that 100 million, but they've got to sort that outgoings first, and then their incoming power will be a lot clearer.
And when you mention that June the 30th date, that's quite important for a number of clubs who have that financial reporting, and that is the cutoff. And that's obviously part of the difficulty that Nottingham Forest have gone through. Not quite the same dates, but they've fallen foul of the Premier League rules because they were holding out for a little bit more to actually, reduce their losses. So there is a key moment in the diary, in the calendar, that is going to affect a number of clubs.
It's key and it's flexible. So the date's the date, and if you're after the date, you're after the cutoff. But then it depends how far after the cutoff you are and why you needed longer. So you can either sell before that deadline and then put it on the books and it helps you, or you can sell after that deadline and then legally you can argue this thing called a near miss. Maybe the paperwork got held up, maybe the player delayed by a few days or a few weeks. So, as you allude to, Nottingham Forest tried to argue there were mitigating circumstances and they failed. And their logic was around Brennan Johnson, who ended up at Spurs, but there were offers from Atletico Madrid and also multiple offers from Brentford. But interestingly, when you look at the dates in the paperwork, the offer from Atletico for 50 million euros was countered by Forest, and nothing then happened. There was no follow up. And that was on the 30th of June, perhaps suggesting that Atletico Madrid tried their luck. Then the Brentford offers, even though they'd made informal inquiries, were 3 weeks after the financial cutoff. And the feeling was for Forest that Johnson didn't want to go to Brentford. So there were no counters and no follow ups. So when Forest started arguing it was a near miss because they ended up selling him to Spurs, can't we just push all of those numbers into the previous financial year? The independent panel basically said, but when you desperately needed to sell, why did you not make any effort to try and get the deal with Brentford over the line? And I think that Forest may argue in that case it was because Johnson never wanted to go. But either way, they tried to argue a near miss. So we should look at this deadline as a specific date. But if, for example, Chelsea were to sell big in the weeks that followed and could argue that there were legitimate reasons why they were working towards that deal before the deadline, but only got it done after the deadline, they may still be able to put the accounting numbers on this year's books and thus have a benefit.
So for you, let's just go over again those positions you think at Chelsea. So you've gone left back, a midfielder, definitely a striker as well, and then there may have been one other.
Yeah, left back, centre back, central midfielder, probably attack minded or versatile, a ball carrying midfielder, and then a forward. So forward's the number one priority. We know that Chelsea like Victor Osimhen, but it's a heavy outlay, so it could end up being connected to the outgoings again, not because the club desperately need to sell trying to avoid breaches, but because once you invest in Osimhen, 100 plus million, £250,000 a week worth of wages, and you still may need three other positions to strengthen. So we need to make it clear that virtually every club will need outgoings to get to this giant spend where they buy an Osimhen-like player and multiple other players. If it isn't Osimhen, Benjamin Sesko is appreciated by the club as well. And I'd keep an eye on Evan Ferguson as well, who would have a big outlay in terms of fee, but the wages would be lower. And Chelsea may see that transfer as more of an investment than an expense as a result. The midfield will be up in the air. Chelsea got plenty of midfielders at the moment, but if Conor Gallagher leaves, they might put some of that money towards another midfielder. But remember, Romeo Lavia is coming back. Centre-back wise, Usman Diomande is still appreciated by the club at Sporting, but he has a big fee and a release clause as well. And Sporting are quite strict at the moment on that. And then left back, a young profile is going to be targeted. I think that Anthony Robinson, who's having a good season at Fulham, and Milos Kirkos have both been scouted by the club. But before they can move on that, they need to get Hort over the line. They need to get Matson out of the club. They need to decide whether they're going to sell Cucurella. And the irony of the left back situation with Chelsea is that Hall, if he shines at Newcastle, and Matson, who's doing really well at Dortmund, and Cucurella, who was signed as a left back, and Levi Colwell, who's still at the club but wants to play centre back but can play left back. All of these options plus Ben Chilwell mean that Chelsea have had plenty of left back opportunities. So if they're going to buy a young profile, that profile somehow has to compete with Chilwell, assuming Colwell wants to play centre back, and surpass the ceiling and the level of talent of those that either have departed or will depart. Otherwise, maybe Chelsea fans will start to question why they didn't keep Lewis Hall or why they don't bring Ian Matson back.
Yeah, yeah. And but that's just one side of the story of London that we are discussing at the moment, and Fabrizio Romano is on the way. What about Arsenal? We talked last week to Charles Watts, who was praising what Arteta and Edu had done at the Emirates, and the fact that they work sort of hand in glove and been very good in the transfer market thus far. What are they targeting in the coming months and at the end of the season, irrespective of where they finish?
Yeah, I think Arsenal are in a stronger position than Chelsea simply because they're okay under profit and sustainability as it stands, although they did have to structure that David Raya deal as a loan initially, and that made it more preferable for them on the books. But nonetheless, they can plan now for Champions League football. We may not be in a position quite where it's mathematical, but I think it's obvious that Arsenal are going to have Champions League football once again, and Champions League football from this season will reflect on the books. And crucially, they've got into the second half of the season. So the income for Arsenal in terms of revenue will be healthy, and that will allow them to move in the market, not to some crazy degree, but enough to target a lead striker in likelihood, and that may be offset by an Eddie Nketiah departure. Arsenal like Joshua Zirkzee. They've been scouting Victor Gyökeres. We know about their links with Ivan Toney. I think it's less likely at this stage that they'll be too aggressive on Victor Osimhen, with maybe PSG the more likely destination. But if Osimhen determines, as has long been thought, that he wants to come to the Premier League and Arsenal enter the race, they probably can go head to head. They might even get ahead, financially speaking, strictly of Chelsea. So they've got plenty of options, but at differing kind of levels, because a player like Zirkzee will be half the price of Osimhen and likely half the wages. Gyökeres has a big fee, but the wages again will be a lot lower. So Arsenal are exploring options, and I think they can sell Eddie Nketiah with Crystal Palace, the club that were interested, in January if they so wish. On the midfield front, they don't have to move, but there's always been a bit of a question mark in the last few windows over Thomas Partey. And we know that Arsenal really like both Martin Zubimendi at Real Sociedad and also Douglas Luiz at Aston Villa. Each have their complications in terms of fee and player desire. If Villa get Champions League, I would expect Luiz to stay. And Zubimendi has often kept Arsenal at arm's length because he thought it was better for his development to stay at Sociedad. But he's now at the kind of age where he might be tempted by a move, and Arsenal's interest in the player hasn't gone away. So I think Arsenal will be looking just for little depth-based reinforcement in and around the defensive or midfield side of their squad, and then a flagship lead striker to give a bit of structure to the bags of versatile talent at the moment that can play anywhere across the front line. And if Arteta, unlike Chelsea, may be looking for four, got two strong senior signings and then a few outgoings to offset that, I think he'd be very happy.
Lou, you talk about Arteta there. He's one person who's got to sign a new contract. He'll have a year to go this summer. There seems no doubt that he will sign a new deal. And as Charles was saying last week again, this is a long-term commitment for Mikel Arteta at Arsenal.
I'd be surprised, as I've said many times. And there's the pre-planned towards the end of the season or at the end of the season talks between Arsenal and Arteta. And then separate to that, there's these links with Barcelona. And I don't really expect them to be connected. I don't think Arsenal are panicking or rushing just because they hear that Arteta's being linked with Barcelona. Of course, he played for their youth teams and their B team. So the links are normal. It would almost be more surprising if he wasn't linked, because he's a top manager and top managers are always linked with the big gigs. But I think that Arteta realizes that his relationship with Edu and also the stability of the project is very rare. And if he was to leave Arsenal for a club like Barcelona, he's walking into the politics. And if a club legend like Xavi is struggling with that, then Arteta has almost a pre-warning. No one's saying that Barca's not a big lure, but it's a different kind of club for a different kind of personality. And Arteta likes the power that he's got at Arsenal. He likes the involvement that he has in transfers, and he's a fit for the wider project because he's collaborative. And it'd be very strange for Arteta to be so integral in this wave of new contracts that has taken place over the last 18 months or so for all of the young players and ones that Arsenal want to either reward or re-reward. And then for the manager, having built that and secured all of these star names, to say that he's walking away. So I think Arsenal realise that Arteta's integral to the project. And I think that Arteta's invested, and the lack of a new deal to date is not down to any worry or warning signs. It's just timing, and the fact that everyone can be calm enough to get towards the end of the season or at the end of the season and then sort it shows you that they're all on the same page. So I don't expect Arteta to go anywhere, and I don't think we can read anything into the contract currently ticking down either. I would expect that Barcelona would at some point mention him internally along with a bunch of others, because why wouldn't you see who's available in the market? But there's been no approach. There's been no indication that Arteta wants to leave Arsenal. And I think that the only likely result at this point in time is that Mikel Arteta, win the Premier League or not, win the Champions League or not, will discuss a new deal with Arsenal and then sign a new deal with Arsenal.
Okay, we're discussing the needs of the Big Six this summer and which way they go, who they bring in, and who they chuck out to get better, to challenge at the top of the table. We have discussed Arsenal and Chelsea. We will be discussing the likes of Liverpool, Manchester United, and Man City and Spurs after we've heard from Fabrizio Romano and his thoughts.
Fabrizio, great to see you as ever. Hope you've got some
My
rest
pleasure.
during the international break. And our focus this week is on the Big Six and their summer plans. So let's start with Arsenal. We know that they may well be in the market for a striker. Any truth that Victor Gyökeres is high on their list?
For sure, he's one of the players they are monitoring. So I would say that he's one of the players they have on their list. Then Arsenal have still not decided who is the player they will sign in the summer transfer window. So there will be still some time, I think at least 1 month, to discuss internally and to decide who is the striker they want to sign. But we know that that position is their priority. And I'm also told that their scouts have been in attendance multiple times to follow Victor Gyökeres, who is doing fantastic at Sporting. It's 50, I think, total between goals and assists this season. So an incredible contribution to his team. The release clause is there, is 100 million euros. So we know how tough it is to negotiate with Portuguese clubs. You can ask also Tottenham with Pedro Porro how difficult it was to bring the player to the club in the January transfer window with the release clause, 45 million euros. So I think it's going to be kind of similar situation. I don't see Sporting really open and flexible on negotiations. So it's going to be a tough one, but for sure Arsenal have an interest. There are also other clubs around Europe, and so Gyökeres will be part of this strikers domino in the summer.
Liverpool's biggest signing is obviously going to be the new manager. We know that Xabi Alonso is high on their list. Bayern are also keen on the Leverkusen manager as well. We hear a lot of information about what the clubs want, but what about Alonso? When might he make a decision? Because right now, it's a key part of the season for Leverkusen.
Yeah, and what Alonso wants is to win 3 titles. So at the moment, I can guarantee that Xabi Alonso is really only focused on that. My information is that around November, December, Xabi Alonso started to consider some opportunities with this interest from Bayern, who was already there. And then someone at Liverpool already knew about the possibility of Jurgen Klopp leaving. So they started inquiring about how the contract and the release clause of Xabi Alonso works, when it's going to be possible to activate the clause. So around November, December, there were some contacts to understand the situation. But then from December to now, the situation completely changed in Bundesliga. So Bayer Leverkusen understood that they really have the biggest chance to win this league, and now is almost done. But also in Europa League, in the domestic cup, they are doing very well. And so the idea at Bayer Leverkusen is to keep going, and it's the same for Xabi Alonso. They don't want any distraction. So this is why, in terms of timing, I always say that I don't think that in March and probably also beginning of April, it's not going to be easy to discuss directly with Xabi Alonso and also with Bayer Leverkusen, because Xabi Alonso is under contract. There is no specific clause for this summer, so it means that any club has to go there and negotiate with Bayer Leverkusen, and they don't want to distract the team from this crucial moment for them. So I'm sure that both Bayern and Liverpool are literally obsessed with Xabi. They will keep pushing, they will keep proposing their opportunities. Every single club has its own factors and projects, so they are presenting their ideas. But at the moment, to say, okay, Xabi is going to decide this day or this week is really too early. And I think it will really depend on when they will win the Bundesliga and then on how it's going, especially in the Europa League.
Real Madrid, meanwhile, have reportedly put Trent Alexander-Arnold on their radar. How likely, though, is a new Liverpool deal?
Let's see, because for sure Trent Alexander-Arnold, we know, is a crucial player for Liverpool, and the fantastic relationship between the player, the city, obviously, the club, and all the people at the club is a great relationship. So I'm sure that Liverpool will try to keep the player at the club, but now is also true from what I'm told that Real Madrid have a concrete interest in Trent Alexander-Arnold. They are monitoring the situation. At the moment, there is no direct contact with his agent or with the player because it's still too early. So Real Madrid are closely following the situation. Let's see the next steps. At the moment, from what I'm hearing, there is no concrete negotiation between Liverpool and Trent to extend the contract. So that's why Real Madrid are also keeping close eye to the situation, because they know that there is not a concrete negotiation between Liverpool and Trent. So I think in the next weeks, April, May, is going to be really important to understand if the new structure at Liverpool with Michael Edwards and obviously Richard Hughes will move to offer a new deal to Trent Alexander-Arnold, and then how this conversation will go.
On to Chelsea then, and Victor Osimhen specifically. We hear a lot of reports about PSG entering that race and some question marks over Chelsea's finances as well. Are Chelsea still a leading candidate for Osimhen?
I think Chelsea will be there. The interest is still there. It's really important to understand what happens, first of all, with the financial fair play situation, because obviously Chelsea don't want to overpay. So it's important to see how much is going to be the package for Victor Osimhen. We already know about the release clause between 120, 130 million euros with Napoli. So Chelsea, as other clubs, are waiting to understand if Napoli can be maybe flexible to negotiate about that, the payment terms, or maybe including some players, to see if there is some way to negotiate with Napoli. But usually with the president, De Laurentiis, it's really complicated and tough to go there and negotiate, especially for a fantastic player like Victor Osimhen. And then I think it's also going to be important to understand how much Osimhen wants in terms of salary, contract. So there are some crucial points on the financial point of view to understand for Chelsea before saying, okay, they will go for Victor Osimhen. But for sure, the interest is there. They are well informed on the situation. So I think they will be one of the clubs interested in Osimhen. And I would also include Paris Saint-Germain, because Luis Campos is the man who signed Victor Osimhen for Lille in the past. So he knows the player so well. But for PSG, in terms of timing, it will be different. PSG will take their time before deciding who is the player they want to sign, how much they want to spend on that position, if they want to go for a winger or a center striker. This is also a topic at the club because they spent big money on Kolo Muani and Gonzalo Ramos last summer. So there is still an internal discussion before saying, okay, Victor Osimhen is the player for us. But for sure, interest from Paris and Chelsea is 100% there.
And what about Conor Gallagher? Any closer to knowing if he'll stay or go?
Not yet. Nothing has really changed in the recent weeks. From what I'm hearing, is not a topic about high salary requests from Conor Gallagher. It's not about that. It's that obviously Conor Gallagher wants to discuss a new deal at Chelsea at his conditions, and Chelsea want to take their time before deciding how is the entire situation around the player, obviously about the salary, about the contract, but also, as I mentioned before, with financial fair play, Conor Gallagher could be an important player because it would be pure profit for Chelsea, and that could be important in terms of financial fair play rules. So let's see what the club decide. I think it's a club decision in this moment, more than player. We know that Conor Gallagher is happy there. Conor Gallagher is waiting for Chelsea. Conor Gallagher has never been forcing his exit. Also last summer when he had the possibility with Tottenham, he was never creating any problem to the club, so always being respectful. But now it's on Chelsea. Chelsea have to decide what they want to do with Conor Gallagher.
Spurs are also likely to be in the market for a striker as well, given that they haven't directly yet replaced Harry Kane. How do you expect them to move this summer?
I think they will try to go with the usual strategy, so not spending a large amount of money on one single player, but maybe investing the budget on 2-3 different positions. So I think that will be the idea for Tottenham, especially in the midfield. I see them busy in the midfield, honestly. I think with Højbjerg probably leaving, there is a chance for Tottenham to bring in a new midfielder, and then there is Lucas Bergvall joining from Djurgården, and this boy is really special talent. So again, congrats to Tottenham for signing him, because he was really one step away from joining Barcelona, and they hijacked the move in the final days of the January transfer window. And then in terms of striker, I think they will look at opportunities. Again, if there is something interesting at the right price. But again, I see Tottenham investing on 2-3 different players, and that could be included also a winger, not just a proper number 9. And I think it's going to be an interesting window for them. But at the moment, still nothing guaranteed in terms of how much they will invest on the striker.
Let's talk about Manchester City. You broke an exclusive about a wonder kid. I know that you love wonder kids in the industry. Cavan Sullivan. How close is that deal to being finalised with Manchester City?
Look, it's almost done. It's just about exchanging documents for this kid who was invited for trials by Real Madrid, Borussia Dortmund, Bayern, all the biggest clubs in Europe wanted this boy to travel, to have an opportunity there, and to offer him a contract, probably because he's really good. Also, on his debut, 14 years old, he had an assist in the last 24 hours, so it looks like a really interesting prospect. But everything is done with Manchester City. So I'm hearing that the contracts are being prepared. Then it's going to be time to sign all the documents in the next days, weeks, and then the player will be part of the City Football Group in the future. Obviously, he's still 14, so he will stay at Philadelphia Union for some time, and then he will have the possibility to become a City player in the future. It will take some years, but people really believe that this kid, Sullivan, is really, really special.
Just a quick word on Kevin De Bruyne as well. We know Pep Guardiola values him. He could sign a new deal at Manchester City, but is the expectation still that this summer Saudi deal makers will try?
I think Saudi deal makers will try, yes, and I think also someone from MLS will try to bring in Kevin De Bruyne. So there will be interest from United States and from Saudi for sure. But the reality today in March is that Kevin De Bruyne has no intention to have any distraction now during the season, in a crucial moment of the season with City busy on different competitions. So full focus on the pitch. De Bruyne will not decide anything now or in April. This is my feeling, my understanding. And I'm also told that at the end of the season, he will have a direct conversation with Man City before discussing with any other club from Saudi or from MLS. And then at that point, we will understand what they will say to each other, how is going to be this exchange. And so we have to be patient to understand the future of Kevin De Bruyne.
Just a final word on Manchester United to complete our Big Six roundup. They're being linked with all manner of players, but is Michael Olise still the one that you expect them to move for first?
I can't guarantee that because I'm still waiting to understand what Man United will do in terms of direct contacts. At the moment, in terms of interest, for sure, he's one of the players who is on the list. So I will keep his name high on the list of Manchester United. But they've not started yet concrete contacts to advance on this deal or close this deal. It's obviously early, still March, but an interest is there. But I think we have to keep an eye on different positions again for Man United. Olise is one of the players, but we know that they will be busy with a center striker. They will be busy with a left back. They will be busy with a center back. And I think we should also keep an eye on midfielders in case something changes in that position with Casemiro. So I think it's going to be a very busy summer again at Manchester United.
Fabrizio, always great catching up. We'll let you get back to reading that amazing library that sits behind you in Napoli. Thanks for your time. We'll speak to you.
Thanks a lot. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks as ever to Fabrizio Romano, Ben Jacobs, and me, Angus Scott, discussing the needs of the Big Six during the summer here on the Debrief. Let's stay in North London because we've been discussing Arsenal, Ben, and Spurs. If you look at their season, would you not think that they're pretty happy with fifth place? I know they got off to a flying start and everyone was thinking, oh my goodness, is this the year that Spurs do it? But you look at the table, they're 6 points clear of Manchester United in sixth, and they're 3 points behind Villa with a game in hand. The top four is still a very realistic possibility, and this is Ange's first season, and he's building and could have quite an interesting summer, don't you think?
I think that's true. I also think that Ange Postecoglou has said very openly it's not actually about positions, it's about progress. So you finish fourth or fifth and get Champions League and everybody will celebrate. But Postecoglou kind of poured cold water on that and said instead, if they get in a Champions League spot, but he doesn't think progress has been made, he'll be disappointed. And if they don't get in a Champions League spot, but he feels they're building something, he'll be quite content. And he would argue nobody celebrates fourth or fifth place, whereas maybe some other people listening believe in modern football now that is an achievement. So he's quite level-headed, and I think trophies are the be-all and the end-all for Postecoglou rather than only Champions League qualification. I think because of the style of Spurs, especially coming from Conte ball to Ange ball, the fans are happy and they're exciting to watch, but they have been liabilities at times as well. And I suppose that's part of the entertainment of it all. But Tottenham are really just looking for a few small tweaks, in my opinion, to consolidate in either that top four or top five heading into next season. And that consolidation can happen regardless of whether they make it this season or not. Because again, if they're taking steps forwards, then that is progress. And I think that's what Postecoglou means. When you get there on merit, and then you've got to be able to stay there. this season for me will be disappointing for Tottenham if they don't finish in the top four, even if fifth is Champions League football. And that's with all respect to Aston Villa. And it's just because Chelsea have underperformed again. And if you're a member of the Big Six and one of the Big Six is out of the top four and you're moving in the right direction, then you should be trying to keep pace with Arsenal if you're Tottenham, especially given the blistering start that they had. So they've fallen back a little bit. And then looking ahead to the summer, I think that they'll still be looking to bring in a midfielder. In addition, they haven't yet technically replaced Harry Kane. So is Son going to stay on and lead the line? Is Richarlison going to step up? Or do they still need a leading striker, allowing Son to play out wide? And then does Richarlison end up being a backup or easing the burden? And that will be interesting because Tottenham have looked at a variety of players, ranging also like Arsenal from Joshua Zirkzee to somebody like Jonathan David, who still hasn't gone anywhere. And they've decided, obviously, this season not to spend big or go big on that kind of flagship forward name, trusting Son, trusting Richarlison. In addition, they'll have Manor Solomon coming back from injury who can get goals, and Timo Werner is at the club and has impressed to some extent. He's done what Werner does. He's been lively. He's scored the odd goal. He gets a lot of assists, gets into dangerous areas, but blows a few big chances as well. So there's an option to buy there. If they don't take that option to buy, they might be looking for a like-minded player to him, or maybe they trigger that option to buy, and then that's stability, and you kind of keep the core squad that you've got together as well. I don't think they'll need another centre-back, even though Mickey van der Ven's had injury problems. Radu Dragason's come in, so they look pretty well stocked in that area. But a central midfielder, an attack-minded, versatile player, and a lead striker to technically and belatedly replace Harry Kane will be the type of areas that I expect them to look at heading into the summer.
Okay, we'll come on to Liverpool, which may be more difficult to judge, bearing in mind that there'll be a new manager there, and we might think, there will be Xabi Alonso coming into Liverpool to take over from Jurgen Klopp, but that's still to be decided. And as I say, we'll come to that in a moment. Let's do the two Manchester clubs, Ben. And perhaps we should start with United, because, again, that's a little bit more complex, I think, than Man City. How will they deal with the new regime? Because it'll be their first full window in which they can really impact on the way they want to go and send a message to the fans and to the rest of Europe.
Manchester United in a similar position to Chelsea. One, they'll judge their manager come summer, and we wait and see if Ten Hag stays or goes. Nothing is predetermined at this point. I know we hear a lot of talk about Gareth Southgate. I'm told it's succession planning. There's a long list of names. There's no one candidate. Nothing is defined. There'll be people like Roberto De Zerbi, Ruben Amorim, Zinedine Zidane, and many others on the list of succession planning potentials. But Ten Hag could also stay. There's no indication that he's definitely going at this point. But like Pochettino, there'll be a decision and a review towards the end of the season or during the summer. And at that point, things will be a lot clearer. Then they've got to get Dan Ashworth over the line. And it remains to be seen whether he's going to be able to influence this summer. And Omar Barada, the new CEO, will be completing his gardening leave and starting over the summer as well. And then they can really get planning. So I think Manchester United will first have to respect that 30th of June deadline, especially if they don't get Champions League football. They'll look for outgoings. Saudi Arabia might be a solution for some of them. I'd keep an eye on Rafa Varane and Casemiro. We know there's interest also in Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Anthony Martial, but how many of those players want to go to Saudi Arabia versus other places? There's a fee there to be had for Mason Greenwood, and the same can be said for Jadon Sancho as well. So Manchester United, like Chelsea again, that 100 million of incomings is feasible, and they'll want to move quickly to get it. And then we see how they move. They will look in likelihood for another striker because the Rasmus Højlund story is moving along nicely. He's progressing. He's found some form, but he could still do some support. And a player like Benjamin Sesko could come into the mix as well. And Chelsea, again, are looking at him. A midfielder as well, I would keep an eye on, and a centre-back. And the order in which Manchester United move and the prioritisation will again depend on the outgoings. If you look at the midfield, I reported the other day, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall is one player that Manchester United have discussed because there's value there to be had, especially considering Leicester's financial situation. And if they don't get promoted to the Premier League in addition, 25 million is then the mark that you could land him. But why move for Dewsbury Hall, a left-sided midfielder, unless you know that Casemiro's going to go and Christian Eriksen's going to go and potentially even offers could come in for Scott McTominay, although Manchester United may now say they want to keep the player. And then the same for the centre-backs as well. It's all very well looking at a centre-back or a few different names. We hear links with Gareth Branthwaite, with Jean-Claire Todibo, and many others. But again, first, you've probably got to get rid of Varane off your wage bill and Harry Maguire. So it's quite a big ask for Manchester United in one window to bring in a top centre-back, a top central midfielder, and a striker to help Rasmus Højlund, because financially they don't have as much money. But if they can get 100+ million in of outgoings, it just might be workable. But maybe the difference is when Bowley Clearlake first came in, 300 odd million was spent and they were happy to do that. Whereas Ratcliffe's looking at a 5-window plan, 3 summers and 2 Januaries, which means that the expectation has been set right from the word go that they don't have to do it all in their first window.
Because there you're saying a centre half, a centre midfielder, and a striker. You got a new spine to the side. So I mean that's a completely different team, isn't it? Which is not the way that Pep has done it at Man City, because he's brought in key people at the right time when you thought, do they need it or not? But he's moved players on and brought in others at exactly the right time. But there may be a bit of key personnel turnover again that he's got to deal with. If you think Bernardo Silva, does he end up at PSG potentially? Does Kevin De Bruyne succumb to a massive bid from Saudi? So there could be some big names leaving Man City during the summer. Would that be fair?
I still don't think they're going to be that busy, although let's also see between now and the summer, even though it may drag on longer, what the resolution is of the 115 charges as well, because that could start to influence things as well. Although we have to start with the premise of innocent until proven guilty, but it's obviously a lot of charges, and we're seeing clubs already docked points for singular charges. So that's the kind of intrigue about this whole thing. You only really need 1 out of 115, and you start with a points deduction. If it's 4 or 5 or 6, which is still a small percentage, it's a very big punishment. And if it's 20 or 30 or 40, then obviously we have a situation which is entirely unprecedented. So that's quite hard to predict. But if we respect Manchester City and the legal process, we have to start by saying they're innocent and not yet factor that in, and look at Manchester City as a powerhouse, trying to retain their dominant position, both in the league, in Europe, and in the market as well. And in that context, I don't think they'll be crazy busy. It's about, as you say, can they hang on to names that they'd like to keep, either for a season longer or extend? And that may be Bernardo Silva, and that will certainly be Kevin De Bruyne. So Pep's always said he won't stand in players' ways if they say they've got another dream move, but they'd love to keep those players as part of their nucleus. But there's no doubt that Saudi Arabia will try for Kevin De Bruyne, and Manchester City may feel like it's 100+ million, much like the offer was for Mo Salah when the move was made by Al Ittihad for him. That's great money. It allows you to move in the market. It allows you to future plan. It allows you to replace De Bruyne, even though some would say he's irreplaceable, with 3 or 4 different players in different positions if you're only looking at it in financial terms. But there's no doubt that Pep wants De Bruyne to extend, and there's no indication yet that De Bruyne wants to leave the Premier League and move to Saudi Arabia, at least not this summer. But he is the top target. I know we hear a lot of talk about Salah, and there's not much between them, but if I had to rank them, De Bruyne is the top target and Salah is not far behind. So let's kind of wait and see what happens there, because again, what Manchester City are able to bring in, both in terms of fees and take off their wage bill, will provide much clearer context as how they can move in the market. Then in terms of incomings, I think central midfielder, somebody to kind of complement Rodri, will be there on their list. And even though we hear a lot of talk about PSG and Bruno Guimaraes, Manchester City may well be one to watch as well. And there's a real feeling that Guimaraes loves it at Newcastle, I should say, loves it in the Premier League, likes this culture, likes this standard. So even though PSG have got that sort of Mbappe hole to fill, and that allows them to move quite freely financially in the summer, which will give them a competitive advantage over many of their rivals, I wouldn't discount Manchester City yet in the race for Bruno Guimaraes if he leaves Newcastle, and it is an if, this summer.
Ben, look, you've mentioned Mo Salah quite a few times. We've done it. We've talked about it all the way through the whole of this season, really, haven't we? Because he may have gone to Saudi last year. He didn't. It seems that the naturalist of fits, doesn't it, for him to go out there for all sorts of reasons. And if Jurgen is going, which he obviously is, then that may be a time for Mo to call it quits on Anfield now that he has this unbelievable record of 20 plus goals in 7 seasons. You know, what more is there that he can do? He may see it as the right time, but that is probably the key name after Jurgen that may leave Anfield this summer.
Yeah, the priority for Liverpool is transition, and that's finding a new manager and then settling the current squad, and then they'll move in the market. So it's not just Salah, it's Virgil van Dijk and it's Trent Alexander-Arnold. Those are probably the big ones. We know that Thiago Alcantara is expected to leave on a free transfer. Clubs are already approaching him, including in Saudi Arabia, to see if they can sign a pre-contract with him. There'll be some interest in a few other players like Joe Gomez, for example, and that's natural. But the big three for Liverpool to try and resolve are Trent Alexander-Arnold, new deal. They obviously desperately don't want to lose him. And it'll be interesting to see what the new manager thinks about where to play him. And then in terms of the slightly more senior players, you've got Virgil van Dijk and Salah. And I think Van Dijk was quite coy on his future and then had to correct and say, I wasn't saying that I'm definitely going to leave, but that's up in the air. And then with Salah, the feeling was always that he'd do one more season at Liverpool, which is bad news for the Saudis this summer. But that doesn't mean they won't be patient and wait until summer 2025. And as you rightly say, now with a new manager incoming, will that change the Salah perspective? Does he relish the opportunity of helping kick off a new era at Liverpool? Or is it the best time to draw a line under it? And Liverpool are in a win-win position in many ways because the same financial offer, give or take, will be there from the Saudis. It's just likely that the club will be Al Hilal and not Al Ittihad. And if Liverpool take it, then they give themselves a big financial advantage moving into the summer in order to get a replacement. And that's where, for example, a player like Pedro Neto might be considered at 70 or 80 million. And if Salah stays, it's Liverpool's preference. It's great from a transitional point of view. They've got more time to find a long-term replacement for Salah, and he is a positive influence in the dressing room, and he can make it 20 plus goals in 8 consecutive seasons. So I think that Liverpool are either going to be able to cash in or they're going to have a better transition under a new manager. And which one of those routes is taken will first depend on who the new manager is, and then Salah having that conversation with Richard Hughes and with Michael Edwards. And this is why Liverpool wanted their hierarchy, their leadership team, their sporting director, their CEO of football. This is why they wanted them all in now, because then everybody can focus on trying to win the Premier League and trying to bring 3 trophies in Klopp's final season, if possible. But you also have a slightly, comparative to the madness of the window being open, quieter end of March and early April, where these new figures, or in Edwards' case, returning figures, can have these direct conversations. So there's no surprises. So I think that by the time we get into mid or late April, even if it's not public, because of how Liverpool work, they'll know exactly where they stand with the likes of Salah, Van Dijk, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. And there may be speculation right up until when the window opens and afterwards. But I think privately, by the end of April at least, Liverpool will know exactly where they stand because they always have a plan. They never do anything at the last minute. So April is going to be a big month, even if what happens in April, as with Klopp, doesn't become public until a few months later.
Look, those are the big 6 needs, Ben. That's not the top 6 needs, of course. Who else might be busy just, do you think, randomly during the summer to just create a bit more competition at the top of the table? Because, you know, Villa are still, as we speak, in the top 4. Even someone like West Ham, maybe a change of manager. I mean, if I was David Moyes, I'd run away from West Ham. Gone, I'm never going to be appreciated. He's done an unbelievable job. They're 7th in the table. go away and let somebody else deal with the fans. But who do you think might, apart from the six that we've discussed, just have a big summer?
Well, Newcastle will be busy because outgoings are going to be important. It'll be interesting to see if Bayern come back for Kieran Trippier, and there might be some more interest in Callum Wilson. Miguel Almiron is for sale. He just wasn't prepared to go to Saudi Arabia, but there was no problem between PIF and Al Shabab in verbally agreeing a package of around 30 million euros. Bruno Guimaraes, obviously, should he be sold, would provide an injection of cash, and Newcastle might have the ability to spend some of that. There's interest in Alexander Isak. And Sven Botman is always going to be in demand. Newcastle obviously are not going to get rid of all of those players, but one or two may be a necessity, and then they may look to move in the market. I think you're absolutely right in what you say about West Ham. David Moyes has done a strong job. If there's a managerial change, it will come with some kind of backing if he stays. And let's not forget, towards the end of the year, he basically said publicly he thought they would get to a new deal, and it hasn't happened to date. But if he signs a new deal, then they'll want to move in the market. They've maybe still got a little bit of that Declan Rice money ready to spend. We know in the past they've been one of the clubs, along with Aston Villa, that have looked at Emil Smith-Rowe. But also the Calvin Phillips deal doesn't have an obligation or an option to buy. And it's not really working out yet. And he's lost his place in the England squad. So if it isn't to be Calvin Phillips, they're going to have to look for somebody else in that position. And if it is Calvin Phillips, they're going to probably have to find 40 million or something within that ballpark in order to secure the deal. So I can see them being busy. And then Brentford are probably one to watch as well. If Ivan Toney's sold, they'll have some money and they'll be able to invest that. If Ivan Toney stays, they'll still likely be looking for a young forward and perhaps a fullback as well. And a few of their players might be in the market to be sold as well. We know that Brighton are always looking for value. They're never crazy busy, but they're never super quiet either. And if, and I'm touching wood, out of picture, my team Leicester come up, then they're going to need to spend, but can they under profit and sustainability? We'll have to wait and see. But I think that some strengthening will be needed at Leicester, and we'll have to understand whether or not they are handcuffed or whether they can have a busy summer. And if they're handcuffed, a busy summer, unfortunately for Leicester, might be losing a player like Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall. Casey McAteer is another one that a few Premier League clubs have looked at as well. He's had a bit of a breakthrough season too, and it impressed a few scouts at other clubs as well. So I think we're going to see quite a fast start to the window. But I think that's down to the fact that, unfortunately, a lot of clubs need money. A lot of clubs need to sell. So there's those two deadlines again. There's that mad rush before June the 30th, which is tricky because we've got a Euros as well, and not many players may want to decide on their future until after that, if they're involved. And then once clubs realize what money they can bring in and how grounded they are financially after that deadline, that's when we might see the other ones that have waited and focused on outgoings starting to spend as well.
And you talked about your team going up. You might go up and then go down before you've even gone up. So you don't know when this is going to be decided, the end of this season. So well, that could be the same with the Premier League as well, because any more appeals or anything else that the Premier League comes up with, we could be deciding we won't know who's in what division until probably the kickoff of next season in August.
Yeah, I think there's a backstop on the cases for example, Nottingham Forest. So it can only run a week or so after the season ends.
Yeah.
But Leicester's an interesting one because the club will basically argue, where's the jurisdiction? Is this the EFL that should be charging us, or is this the Premier League? And it's very hard to think that this can be resolved with any prospective punishment this season, simply because time's running out. And due to the way the playoffs work, it would be absolute madness if Leicester finished in an automatic spot. You were ready to start the playoffs, but you were waiting to see whether Leicester dropped into the playoffs, dropped outside of the playoffs, or stayed in an automatic spot. So I suspect the Premier League have charged Leicester, even if the club disagree with the jurisdiction, because they think Leicester are coming up one way or the other, and they are readying things for, if they come up, for resolving this over the summer period. And then should there be a points deduction, it will come off next season if Leicester are a Premier League club. But what's interesting about that is the EFL simultaneously under their rules have put Leicester under a transfer embargo, and they are under EFL jurisdiction. So if it's expedited, you could argue, because you can't have double jeopardy of Leicester being punished this season and then punished next season by the Premier League, that a points total could be deducted this season. I think it's less likely because the Premier League that are the ones that issued the original alleged charges and statement. But could we get a scenario where it all gets done really quickly and Leicester get dock points this season? I'd be surprised, but I suppose legally it's not entirely impossible.
But you're hoping not. You'll just be starting next season on -4. That's all. That might be the.
We'll be fine. We're still in the Premier League on -4.
We shall see. That's a long way off. There's a lot to happen between now and then. Ben, thank you very much for going round the grounds, as it were, and finding out and giving us your thoughts on what is going to be happening for the Big Six and others during the summer. It will be a busier time, certainly, than the January window, which, as we know, was a bit of a snooze fest. But this summer is going to be, I suspect, very, very busy indeed. And remember that the Saudis will come back into play for quite a lot of clubs. I think everyone who is leaving any club will be mentioned in connection with the Saudis, irrespective of whether they even thought about going there. And most of them won't want to. But there will be some that very much end up in the Saudi Pro League next year. Ben, thanks very much indeed. Great to have your company. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be back with the debrief next week.